Hello, I'm Stuart Childs and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With heavy rainfall across the country in the last few weeks, even dry farms are reaching saturation point, so I thought it would be worth hearing about some of the learnings from the Heavy Soils programme. I asked Pat Tuohy, Heavy Soils programme coordinator, to discuss some of the learnings from the last 10 years of the programme, and I started by asking Pat to give me some background to the reasons for the establishment of the Heavy Soils programme in the first place back in the late 2000s.
If we think back to 2008, 2009, 2012, it wasn't just the shoulders of the year. It was well into the middle of the year. We were getting wet conditions. So I suppose that's what drove on the programme. Historically, there would have been a number of research farms on heavier soils, the likes of Kilmaley and Ballinrobe, and others over the years, but those had tended to, or were no longer, I suppose, under the research side of the organisation. So there was I suppose there was a focus or a pressure there that there should have been a focus more so on dealing with these types of soils and away from the moor parks that you mentioned and away from some of the drier soils. And that's where the programme started, really, in terms of there was a good proportion of the milk pool coming, the estimate is about 30% coming from heavier soils. So the question was, could we be doing more from a research point of view and on those soil types and a management point of view and getting advice out there in terms of improving management of those soils. So yeah, as you say, it's up and running probably 10 years plus at this point, but that was the start of it all back in 2011, 12.
And you've a couple of long established farms on it, but you've also recruited some new farms recently or in recent years as well. Was that just to broaden the programme? We'll say it was very much focused on the southwestern side of the country originally. These new farms are kind of further north.
Yeah, so we had 7 farms in Munster initially, and those are the original hardcore, if you want to call it that. But yeah, we moved around then in terms of a farm in Mayo in Crossmolina, a farm in Cavan, in Stradone, David Brady, and a farm in Monaghan, James McMahon, near Swans Cross in Monaghan. And I suppose, like any programme, we're always, I suppose, looking every couple of years to add a few names maybe, or potentially to add a few farms. So we're actually at that process again now in terms of looking in different regions of the country and seeing what might be out there in terms of broadening out the message. I suppose the farmers that are on the programme to date have made good progress, and there's kind of a fairly clear blueprint there now in terms of how they are being run and how they're being managed, and there's a lot more resilience in those systems in terms of dealing with the wet conditions that might come at any time of the year. So it's about, I suppose, spreading the message really into other parts of the country and freshening it up for all of us, really and truly. So yeah, we started off in Munster, but we're spreading the wings all the time, I suppose.
Okay, so still recruiting currently, so if people are interested maybe to contact their own advisors maybe about getting in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as I said, and if there's particular regions, which there always is, more and more, we joked in the past that you could have maybe one in every parish, but I don't think we'll get to that extreme, but there's plenty of regions around the country that would be suited to the messages, I suppose, or the management, the ideas around management of these soils that we're promoting.
Yeah, so you mentioned there that the lads that are involved in the programme there have come on quite a lot in the last number of years. What would their key learnings be for those farms? And I suppose, look, we'll get into a few bits and pieces of it, a little bit more detail in a minute, but just kind of an overall, what's been the big benefit for them from what they've said to you? Yeah,
sure. It started off, look, the key issue being soils being overly wet and waterlogging, and the antidote or the solution there, I suppose, was land drainage and improving the research and the practice in terms of land drainage design and installation. And look, there had been a good lot of work done again in the 70s and 80s and in a pre-quota era, I suppose, in terms of looking at suiting particular drainage systems to particular soils and maximizing returns from drainage works, but that had kind of gone out of fashion, I suppose, to a degree. So that was the first area that we were looking at. And as the program developed then and we started to get more and more involved with the guys in question, it became clear there was issues around, soil fertility was a major issue. not so much grassland management, but access around the periods we're talking about in terms of wet conditions. So simple things like grazing infrastructure and roadways and paddock access and stuff like that. That again is relatively straightforward, but maybe wasn't fully set up as it could have been, and that's an issue generally across the industry. I suppose it's fair to say, particularly as herds have got a bit larger. So those were the major things in terms of dealing with soils directly, I suppose, access to the land, drainage of the land, and improving soil fertility. And then, the guys as well were fairly progressive in terms of breeding and genetics and EBI and infrastructure around the yards and facilities and everything else. So depending on the year in question or the day in question or the farm you're talking about of the 10 as it was in the program, different issues were, in focus at different times, but largely they were the ones I've outlined there.
Okay. And then you obviously said that the programme kind of started initially focusing on the land drainage piece, really. What kind of maintenance of drainage work are the farms doing currently? We'll say for the drains that would have been maybe installed initially, there would have been a lot of focus on that at the time. We'll say there would have been articles in the press and so forth about the work that was being done on the different farms. Is it still an important piece of the whole process, the maintenance of those drains and further drainage taking place on the farms as well?
Yeah, I suppose what we were pushing at the time, and still are, be around the assessing soils appropriately and suiting the drainage system to a particular soil type, and then setting it up in such a way that the system will pay for itself ultimately and see a return. That went on. As you said, there was a lot of coverage of that over the years. There's anything from, again, depending on the farm, 30% to 75 or 80% of the land area that's probably subjected to drainage at this stage. If you look back over a 10 or 15 year period, I suppose we're also wary in terms of the issues that come with that. We're very clear that we're putting a good bit of focus into keeping an eye on water quality and measuring that and how drainage and management around these soil types might affect that. We're also, I suppose, keenly aware in terms of the management of organic soils and peat soils. So the program, we've mapped all the soils on the farms. There's 71% of the soils that are wet mineral soils. Well, they're not all necessarily wet, but that are mineral soils, and the majority of them are relatively wet soils. So that's where the drainage works tends to be focused. And then the other part of your question, I suppose, in terms of maintenance, there has to be, and I suppose I've always, anyone who's heard me speaking before, have said it, if we could maintain what was already in the ground, and keep an eye on it and keep it managed, the need for additional drainage would be reduced. But it tends to be the nature of it when it's buried and when it's relatively dirty work, I suppose, to keep it maintained. It tends to be put on the back burner to a degree. But in terms of keeping open drains, any obstructions are there, and they don't need to be, clean bare or anything like it. There doesn't need to be an over egging of the thing in terms of cleaning drains. But if there's any obvious obstructions, they can be removed or kept an eye on. If there's blockages to the outlets of field drains, they should be rotted or cleaned periodically. So it's a matter of just keeping an eye and keeping things moving, I suppose, where they need to be moving. And that's, it's like maintaining anything in terms of equipment or machinery or anything else. It's an ongoing battle.
And then is there, you said that there's variance from 30% up to 80% of the soils that need draining maybe on the farms that you're dealing with. So are there farms in the programme still actually draining, we'll say, and some of the newer guys that have come in maybe on an upward line in terms of the amount of drainage that they are doing or work that they're doing?
Yeah, I suppose the 30 to 80% I was mentioning was the amount that's actually drained. So yeah, there is still, and I suppose like any system, maintained or not, there's probably some older systems on the farms that would be replaced every so often. So there's nearly always a call for some additional work. Depending on the farm, there might be more to do or less to do, but there is ongoing work, generally speaking, all the time.
Yeah, and how critical then, Pat, I suppose, in terms of like there's drainage work probably takes place every year on lots of farms around the country, but like the quality of it sometimes can be questionable. Maybe how critical has the success of the program of works that the lads have engaged in been in terms of the actual advice that they got to make sure that what they were doing was the right process to do, like as opposed to just getting a digger in and digging drains here, there, everywhere. And eventually they work for a period probably, like, but eventually they stop, or they may not work at all, but you feel good that you've done it. Like,
there's a good bit of variability in terms of what's done out there, and I suppose again, simple things or simple tweaks in terms of depths of drains, or in terms of installing systems that supplement the drains in terms of gravel mold drains, or in terms of subsoiling, or something that amplifies the effect of the drainage, really is what we're talking about. So it's suiting the system that suiting the soil with a particular drainage system is key. And look, there's information out there. There's a drainage manual that we've published earlier this year that's available up online as a PDF, or it's available to buy as a hard copy. There's plenty of information out there, and as I said, we're spreading the word for the last number of years on it. Those fields that have been drained, I suppose and if you can go back to the pasture-based data and the stuff that's been recorded on farm walks and covers, there's anything from 4 to 6 or 7 tons per hectare per year of an increase in terms of production. So yes, they can be expensive systems, and the systems that we've installed in some parts of the farms are fairly intense and expensive as a result, but where they work and work well, there's a return to be had there, so it's I suppose what frustrates us at times is just seeing different systems in different parts of the country that are, I suppose, underdone or not suited to the particular soil, and there's still a cost there, and there's money being spent, but they're not controlling the water table, or they're not I suppose yielding any kind of a return. So obviously they might work out cheaper on a per hectare basis as an upfront cost, but when there's no return, they're obviously wasteful, or there's no justification, I suppose, in terms of wasting money on a system that doesn't work.
And you just kind of touched on it there as well. So just looking at the figures there from 2011 to 2021, there's a 3-ton difference in terms of the grass grown, and actually one of the years it would have been even higher than that, or nearly actually on the 3-ton. How was, like you said there, about the actual just being able to get at the fields pasture based, showing you that you've greater grass grown on those? Was there anything else that would have been influencing the level of growth on those farms, and what's driven its increase? Like,
yeah, so as I said, the drainage, when done right, has a big play in that. The soil fertility hasn't been improving all the time. Look, there's still ground to make up there, and these soils are difficult in terms of showing a response in terms of nutrient application. The response mightn't always be as it would be on other soils. That there's a high clay content of these soils, so there's an issue there with particularly with phosphorus getting locked up. But there is gains to be made there. We've gone from, I think, 2% of paddocks initially when they were all tested in late 2013. We did the first full sweep of soil fertility soil tests. 2% were optimum for pH, P and K, and we're up to, I think, 28% as of the end of last year. So nationally, the figures, I suppose, 10 years ago were 10% when we were at 2%, and now nationally figures are 20 to 25%, and we're at 28%. So look, we wouldn't necessarily be overly happy from school with 28% in an exam, but considering where we are or where we started, I suppose we're certainly moving in the right direction. And as I said, there's ground to be made up there. Getting out then in terms of access, grazing earlier in the year. The guys, I suppose, are doing a lot of walks. They're averaging probably 35, 40 walks in the year. Some of them are up on 50. Not so much the measurement is obviously the purpose of doing the walk, but in terms of getting out at certain times of the year when the weather is a bit iffy, and saying, it's very easy to stand inside in the yard at times and say the place is wet and it won't be dry until X if it stops raining. But walking the farm regularly in the shoulders of the year, I suppose, shows up where there's potential grazings, maybe getting access to those, be it roadways or spur roadways or access points. They might be only short bouts, it might be only 2 or 3 or 4 hours out grazing, but they're getting a grazing in when others mightn't, or when even themselves in the past mightn't have had the facility in terms of access or the regular walks to try and assess where the opportunities were. So I suppose that's a lot of it. And of course, then when they're getting out there during the year, they're promoting growth and all the rest of it. So there's gains all the time there, and there's no one answer. There's kind of a combination. And if you look in detail at some of the data that's there on some of the paddocks that were drained, 7, 8, 10 years ago, yes, the drainage might have been fixed as an overnight kind of a timeline. But then there was an issue maybe with fertility that had to come right. Then there was an issue with access that had to come right. So you can nearly see the progression over time in terms of production. It didn't all get solved with the drainage, for example, or wouldn't all get solved with fertility coming right. But all the different elements being combined is bringing that ceiling up a bit higher in terms of overall production.
Yeah, so the sum of the parts is greater than all the individual pieces in reality, like. So I suppose, like, you've covered the grass a lot there, like, but these farms have a lot of other things done right, and you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier there as well. They've very good EBI, they've very good 6-week calving rates, which are probably almost fly in the face of heavy soils, in that the theory would have been nearly that you shouldn't calve too hard, because sure, you won't be able to get them out. Where we'll say, what do you think? Is there anything else? Was mindset something that was different with these guys, do you think, relative to the general populace, or was it just luck?
Yeah, no, look, I think they're very good farmers. They're at the top of their game. There's no point saying otherwise. I think there's value, as everyone will know, listening in terms of discussion groups, and a bit of peer pressure is great in terms of whenever we meet and get in a room together for discussions. We're always very transparent with our information, and everything is put up on a screen, and people can see fairly clearly when they're, if there's certain aspects they're falling down, be it, costs in a particular year, or the number of grazings in a particular year, or the number of walks, or whatever. So it keeps us all honest, I suppose, to a degree. There's a push there. You mentioned the 6-week calving. I suppose, look, they'd probably be on average, probably maybe a week behind the mean calving date of a lot of the rest of the country, or drier parts of the country. And that's to try and match up a bit better with grass, with access, I suppose, to grass as opposed to grass production. So with that, then I suppose they nearly need to be better in terms of 6-week calving rate, and keeping them all coming relatively as one group as much as possible. And the EBI issue, I suppose, look, they've climbed fairly dramatically in the space, the period of the program. They're gaining, if you look back over the data, they're probably gaining 12 or 13 euro a year, whereas an industry target is probably around 10. So they're pushing beyond that. So all those different aspects, again, I suppose they're reasonably competitive as well, as I say. So if there's a few front runners in any of these aspects, they'll usually pull the rest of them along with them. So there's the mindset is there, is right, and I suppose they're progressive, or looking forward all the time, and keeping everything in check then in terms of improving, I suppose, or making it a more resilient system, or a more resilient business, I suppose, as time goes on.
Okay, so I suppose 2 final questions for you. Just in relation to obviously we have the Grass 10 program there, which is trying to promote 10 grazings per paddock per year. I see from looking through the figures there that the number of grazings in 2021 was 7.1. Now it's not not far off the pasture-based average. Now it's 7.5 either, so it's not a negative, I suppose. But is there scope for more, or are they maxed out in reality? Like, is it just they're going to be beaten? And I suppose the role of the infrastructure that they have in the farmyard then as well, in the role that plays for them in terms of achieving what they're achieving too, maybe.
Yeah, I suppose the one of the major things that we've always discussed as a group is that yes, we're pushing more grazings obviously all the time, and having the system set up as I described in terms of allowing that, or having the facility to have more grazings. But that said, it should always be a choice in terms of they're not forced out, and there isn't, so that comes back to the facilities in the yard being right, and having sufficient reserves of fodder in the yard, that there isn't, a gun to anyone's head, if a winter goes on too long, that they have to be left out. because on these soils, look, if they're soft and if they're wet, there is going to be a good bit of damage done if stock is left out in the wrong conditions. So, it's that balancing out. They're not going out regardless. There is still obviously a weather issue and a seasonal effect there at play all the time. But again, it's pushing those opportunities. So look, if you look in detail at the figure you quoted was 7.1, again, I suppose it goes back to what I was saying a minute ago. Some are a good bit above that average and one or two are below that. So it's I suppose, taking the learnings from the guys who are above that and trying to bring everyone along in terms of improving that average figure. I would say there is scope to improve it. Some farms more than others. And again, it's picking out those opportunities and getting those grazings where they can be got. So it goes back to what I was saying, having access and having the foresight, I suppose, to have those areas picked out that might be opportunities when the weather starts to dry a bit at particular times of the year.
I suppose the level of grazing management, you mentioned a number of walks there earlier as well. Like it's nearly even more critical for the lads on the heavy soils because they have to take out the surpluses when they arise because they need that surplus on the shoulder periods then as well. And that's the high quality material that's going to underpin the system when they're inside.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that quality really is the word, Stuart, that they have it when they need it. And again, there isn't that feeling, I suppose, that things will drop in terms of solids production or what have you, in terms of if the feed quality isn't there. So they would be very strong in terms of identifying when covers are going to be strong and when there needs to be a few paddocks cut out of the round. So that material, I suppose, it does both. It keeps the grassland management in check and quality in check at the peak of the growing season, and it gives them those reserves in terms of the high quality feed. So again, it's a win-win really.
Okay, so finally, Pat, I suppose I'll just ask you, what advice would you give to other farmers that are out farming on heavy soils, we'll say, from what you've learned from the programme with the lads? And as you said, like, they've contributed a lot to what you've learned as much as what you've contributed to them learning too. Like,
absolutely, yeah, we're all the time learning off each other. It's very much a group effort. Look, I suppose the main message is to have the farm set up such that it's resilient as possible. As I said, there is going to be, look, we haven't had a summer like 2012, obviously, in a decade now. That's not to say there isn't one around the corner. There has been very wet springs and very wet back ends in the last number of years, really, which have put people under pressure. But it's, again, having the system set up, the areas that need to be drained, that's done appropriately and done in a way that you'd see a return from it. The areas that need to be looked at in terms of soil fertility, sampling every paddock every year is what we've done in the programme, and that's looked from a research question point of view. But certainly every paddock should be sampled reasonably, on a reasonable time frame, repeated on a reasonable time frame. That information is there. Pick out the paddocks that are underperformers, get those up and running. Have your access, have your roadways, have your systems in place that you're not going to have the opportunities if as you would if the soils were a lot drier and there is more difficulties in terms of management and all that taken into account. But it's setting up the system that there is options there, that if there is windows of opportunity, I suppose, that the farm is set up to be a bit more resilient and to take those opportunities really is what it comes back to.
Okay, very good, Pat. Thanks for coming on today, and appreciate you giving us your time. Thanks.
No bother, Stuart.
That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Age podcast, and my thanks to Pat Tuohy for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Stuart Childs, and join me next time for your Dairy Age.